to Saving UX. I'm your host, Jeremy Kriegel. I believe UX is struggling. Look, there are more people doing the work now than ever before, and every customer says they're customer focused. So why does it feel so hard? And I don't mean the work. The work can be hard, that's okay. Why does it feel like we need to fight to do the things that will benefit the people we serve and the organizations we work with? I've been in this fight for 25 years, and I believe it's worth fighting for. UX, done well, and applied to important problems, can change the world. Every week I talk to UX veterans about the challenges facing our practice and what we can do to make it better. This week I'm joined by Dan Berlin. Dan is the founder and principal at Watch City Research and the editor and an author of 97 Things Every UX Practitioner Should Know. Dan, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks for having me. Pleasure to be here.
Great. Now, before we get started, would you mind giving a little bit about your background so folks can have some context for the rest of the conversation?
Sure, happy to. So like many folks in UX, I found the career serendipitously. I happened upon it. My background's in psychology, my undergrad's in psychology, but coming out of undergrad, I was picking up the phone doing tech support. But one day I sat as a participant in a usability study, and I said, what is this life? This is a beautiful mixture of computer geekery, which I was doing, and psychology, which was my background and passion. So that's when I quit my job and went to Bentley University for their MBA and MS in Human Factors and Information Design. And then I've been living the agency life ever since. I was at another agency for a couple of years, and then for the past 10 years, I was at MadPow, where I built up their research team, the user experience research team. And then most recently, in the past 4 months, I struck out on my own, building up my own company, Watch City Research, here in Waltham, Mass. We're focusing on user experience research and providing that service to others.
Cool. And MadPow is quite a success story as an agency. Really one of the few built from nothing, acquired, hoping to have Amy as the founder as a guest one of these weeks.
Yeah, no, I'm very lucky to have been at MadPow during those years. And, what drew me to MadPow to begin with was UX research. They were doing it so early. And I saw that this small agency was doing research, and I'm like, I gotta work there.
Cool. So how do you look at where we are as a practice now, and how has that changed over the course of your history?
It's funny. I was listening to your intro. I'm like, it's so interesting because we have changed so much over my, 13, 14-year career now in UX. But to your point, a lot of things have just stayed the same in terms of getting a seat at the table sometimes. So, where are we? It depends, right? And I'll open with that because it depends on the UX maturity model of the company, right? Or where they are in their UX maturity. Are they, they're just trying to get started and they're not really sure how to do so, or have they been doing it forever and have processes in place and UX has a seat at the table at a high level? Because UX and the business processes and product are so intertwined. When design does have a seat at the table, it works out. When they don't, not so much.
Yeah, maturity, I think, has been a very hot topic lately, and everyone's got their own different maturity models. As a consultant, I imagine, you guys have worked with a lot of different organizations. How would you describe the range of maturities that you've seen? Did you see it getting better over time and even into your own practice? Generally, do you see the maturity improving, or is the trend going in a different direction?
I hate to say it, but I don't think it is improving. To this day, a lot of folks that I talk to, the big question that I still get is, how can I make inroads at my company of showing that UX is important? And that's the same question I've been seeing for the past 13 years. When the inroad does happen, though, then it does get a little easier. But that same pattern has been happening for all these years.
So I imagine someone who's coming to you, whether now or in the past at MadPow, there has to be at least some level of maturity where they know they want your services to give them some benefit. how much further education do you tend to have to do, maybe during the sales process as you're defining engagements? Where do you find the biggest gaps to be?
You're right. So the engagement in consulting life will depend on that maturity. So there's sometimes when they know exactly what they're doing, they know exactly what they want from the consultant. When we sit down during the sales process, it's just smooth as silk. Yeah, you want this, we can do that. Boom, done. And even just the process of doing the study, let's say a simple usability study, they can easily convey their goals. We can come up with tasks and be just very efficient about it. For others where they are more starting with to bring UX into their world, it's more of a process of of an understanding how they can do that, integrate it into their process, what questions we need to ask to uncover insights for their goals, because they're sometimes have a hard time articulating what their goals are in terms of user experience and how the business and user experience do interplay together. So sometimes it takes a little bit more explaining in terms of here are the things that we can do to attain user insight goals.
Are there any particular techniques, messages, et cetera, that you've found more effective in bringing people along in that conversation that maybe others might be able to take advantage of?
Two, usability study. You know, it's like that Silicon Valley show from HBO where the person's banging on the glass. There's not, and what I say to folks is like, there's nothing like watching a person crying while using your interface to prove that there's a problem, right? You know, some people just don't realize that there's such a problem, and they have a hard time accepting that until they see 8 people in a row make the same problem, and then that light bulb goes off. So having people observe. I mean, as a researcher, one of the biggest things we want to do is encourage people to observe, so that they have that experience and can be part of that process. The other thing are workshops that bring people into the fold. Either observing participatory design workshops with participants, or doing workshops with stakeholders, or not, or it should be workshop with stakeholders to get them sketching or to get them ideating and to draw them into the analysis and reporting process that helps to increase involvement and buy-in.
Now, I know some executives, stakeholders, et cetera, often have the notion that they understand what their users need, right? I don't need to talk to people. Mm-hmm. I know my customers. Maybe I was that person at some point. Do you still encounter that, or are those people self-selecting out because someone coming to you already knows that they need to learn more?
It's rare that we hear that straight up, I think, in UX. To your point, like if they think that they know exactly what needs to be done, they're not seeking out UX, right? Sometimes often there is that one person at the table who does think they know everything that needs to be done, but having that observation moment really does help. Even when there's all this, often enough businesses approach a design problem thinking that they know what needs to be done based on market data and what the market is doing, and as you said, past experience with this particular user group, for example. But again, having people observe workshops and research, even user interviews at the beginning of a design project to hear it straight from the user's mouth of what they actually expect can open folks' eyes.
Do you approach these conversations differently now than you did earlier in your career? Has your process changed?
No, honestly, has the process changed? No, especially when it comes to research, right? Because what a UX research consultant brings to the table is UX research experience. As it says on my new website, give me any experience, I can research it, right? It's up to the client to bring the domain expertise. So it's up to us to bring that research expertise and rigor of how we do things, and rely on the client for the domain expertise. And we learn about the domain quickly. That's why I love consulting. But the process is goals. Again, comes back to goals with research. I want to know about what are your goals for this product or business process or experience or whatever it is we're researching, and so that we can ask the right questions of users and draw at the right insights. That's the process.
So you moved from a very successful agency where you said doing a lot of great research, and now you're on your own. What were some of your considerations that made you that led you to that choice? And maybe you could talk a little bit about what the experience has been like for you, going independent. I know a lot of people are considering a similar
Yep.
move.
Yeah, it wasn't a decision made quickly, and brought on by the pandemic. I think the pandemic is a time of change for a lot of people, so it made people think greater about what they were doing in life. Additionally, I had the book come out, right? So just had this book come out, 97 Things Every UX Practitioner Should Know. Here you go. There we go. And so that greased the wheels as well. So what a perfect time to start my own gig. And in terms of why, so to your point, yes, I was at this awesome agency. MadPow continues to be awesome. I love MadPow. And the research practice that I left, as I know, is thriving and doing awesome stuff. But I wanted to focus on more variety, right? MadPow has the certain domains that they tend to focus on. They're great at healthcare and finance, but I love the variety of work. And part of my goal is to do business development in a larger variety of domains, right? I want to, and additionally, as a tech geek, and I want to open up a lab, right? That was part of the vision of this company, because we've UX researchers have all been to research facilities, market research facilities, where they charge you $100 a day to put a monitor in the observation room, and they roll their eyes at you when you want to run a cable between rooms. And I want to put an end to that. I want to make a usability research facility that makes it super easy for people who in myriad domains to do their research. So whether it's just a simple website or something like that, or even like appliance hookups or a car simulator or a medical device and having oxygen available, having those little amenities available to make it as easy as possible to do your user research. That's the vision.
So what would that lab look like, and how would that benefit, over the standard setup that people are doing in their conference rooms or virtually today?
So conference rooms are great, and you don't need a fancy lab to do user research or usability. Absolutely not. You can do it in conference rooms. You can do it remotely very easily. But what I believe about the external lab is that, well, in the old days, it got people out of the office, but that's no longer a thing. It gets people together, focused in the same place, focused on their research. Yeah, people are obviously doing work on their laptops as the sessions are going on, but even when that happens, they hear something. They're still listening, and they hear something really interesting, and poof, now they're in, right? And having everyone there really helps to build engagement with the research. And again, yeah, you can do it remotely. You can stream and have everyone observe, but they're going to pay way less attention if they're sitting there and they can see the people through a one-way mirror. They're going to be way more engaged. Plus, I have a vision of like enabling streaming and being able to mark in and out videos and something like that. So what I just talked about was the observer side. On the researcher side, just taking care of all the BS that they don't want to deal with when they walk into a facility. They want to concentrate on doing good research and asking the right questions. They don't want to deal with the technological side of things, of recording and getting the feed into the other room and things like that. I've been in enough situations where the morning of the monitor that I rented, which is 13 inches because it's been there since the 90s, poops out. A lot of researchers have been there, and I want to build a place to avoid that sort of thing.
Early on in my career, I was at Xerox back in the late '90s, and we had a great lab. We had 2 different rooms with remote cameras from different angles. We had
Lovely.
the one-way mirror, and it really does make a difference when you do get stakeholders in that room. It is soundproof, so even though they're yelling at the participants, it really does give them a much more evocative experience. We had an editor on staff who would edit the videos down for just for the highlight reels. It really tremendous effect, but I haven't seen a facility. I haven't worked with a facility like that since the late '90s. So I love what you're talking about building here.
And people are building their own internal labs, which is awesome as well. We had an awesome lab at MadPow. I know, Fidelity has their amazing lab. But offices are almost becoming passé now. So this could be that place to do that as well. So if you're not going to build a lab in your office, let's do it here. And I want to make it accessible. A lot of the prices that I've seen, again, haven't done the math on this yet, but a lot of the prices that we deal with in market research facilities are outrageous. And I think there's an opportunity to bring that down, to encourage people to do that in-person research.
Cool.
Yeah.
I want to go back to something else you touched on. As an independent, you mentioned business development, and I think there are those elements of being on your own, being freelance, contractor, et cetera, that I think a lot of people don't think about. Like, you can be good at the practice, but being good at the practice isn't enough.
Right.
Can you talk a little bit about, what you've learned or some of the challenges around running a whole business and being a complete business person, as opposed to just being an excellent researcher, which obviously you are?
Right. Well, thank you. That's part of why I did it, honestly. It's that business challenge of stepping out of my comfort zone of just managing a research team and dealing with, business development. And if I don't do business development, I don't eat, that sort of thing. But also, I look forward to hiring people because, just because I have an MBA doesn't mean I like doing accounting. That's just horrible. So to your point, there are all these side things that need to be done that you don't think about. It's the accounting, it's the insurance that you need. Companies will require insurance, or all these startup costs that I didn't realize. But that's part of the fun. And to your point about business development, almost the most important part is that I got lucky. Again, with MadPow, because I led the research team, I did a lot of selling, and I realized that I enjoyed it. 10 years ago, I wouldn't touch with a 10-foot pole, right? I think that I just didn't want to deal with that. But now I like it. It's the there's a rush when you win, right? And finding different people to do work with is very fun. And so put all that together, which made this a lot easier in my mind, quote unquote, easier. And so all of that together, in terms of the liking sales and knowing enough accounting to be dangerous, and having the research expertise and having the network. So that was the thing. I think you asked about this earlier in terms of striking out on my own, like the comfort level there. I am lucky and humbled to have the network that I have, right? I've been doing a lot of volunteer work at UXPA Boston and other conferences and things like that. And the instant I changed my LinkedIn status, I had some great leads. And it's been good like that ever since. So all of that together, comes together in this, it's so far so good situation.
I have to say, it doesn't surprise me to say that you liked a certain amount of the sales process. When I've been independent in the past, I found that the sales process was analogous to user research. You were trying to understand what the other person needed and their perspective and their constraints, and you're seeing, can I craft something that's going to fit? The part I always found challenging was the pricing part, and in some ways valuing myself high enough to be able to survive, frankly. And one of the times I stopped consulting was I just wasn't charging enough. And I remember a conversation I had with Melissa Perry. She has her product leader. She has her own podcast and book, phenomenal. And at one point, when she was still just an independent, before she'd really built up her enterprise, I had asked her what she was charging, and she was kind enough to share it. And it blew my mind. And I couldn't even imagine myself asking for that much money. So I'm just kind of, for other people who might be struggling with the same thing, how do you approach pricing, and how do you think about valuing what you do and asking for what you're worth?
Right. Again, I'm lucky enough that I was at MadPow and dealt with contractors for the past 10 years, right? At an agency, when we don't have enough people to do the work that we have, we use trusted contractors. And so I knew the going rates, right? And I knew what I can get, these days for the experience that I have. Additionally, there's a lot of communities out there that will have these discussions, right? It's the freelance channel in the research ops Slack community, for example. Someone asked the rate questions, and everyone's like, "Yeah, here are my rates." That sort of thing. I like to do fixed price, that sort of thing. But it's learning it from the community. But I was lucky enough to see, and then the how many hours it's going to take is the key, right? Pricing aside, the trick is estimating how many hours it's going to take to do this thing. And, if I get it wrong and it's fixed price, then, it starts eating into my profit, that sort of thing. So again, being at an agency for a long time, I sort of helped, I crafted that over time. And that's why I have an idea of what it does take.
So you've seen lots of projects, you know what it's going to take. You've hired contractors, you know what they charge, and you've put together proposals for other customers, so you know what they'll pay.
Yeah. Yep. And know the going rates in general. I know what they'll pay and what they won't pay, more importantly. Right. And it's different in different communities. What user research costs in Boston may be different what it costs in Memphis because the participants are much cheaper to get. That sort of thing. There's, fewer hard costs in different communities. So it depends.
Oh, that's interesting. Do you find now that you are mostly working with Boston area clients, or is your reach broader than that?
Currently all Boston based because that's where my network is. Obviously open to more. Any consultant is. At MadPow, the clients were all over the place, all over the country, if not the world. So, especially in the remote community that we have these days, it really almost doesn't matter. Although if I build this facility, then it will matter, right? Because people will have costs to come here. So it's all a balance. It's a cost benefit balance there.
Cool. I want to shift gears a little bit. A lot of people talk to their customers. Not as many as should, but a lot of people do. Not all of them are trained as facilitators. What do you see as the biggest difference in terms of how someone conducts a conversation that, I guess, maximizes the kinds of insights they're going to get out of that interaction?
Yeah, that's an awesome question. So moderating is my most favorite part of the job. I love sitting in a room with a participant trying to draw out the insights because it's acting. It's the most fun. And that's the key, is that to be a good facilitator, you need to be a good actor because you want to be consistent between participants. You want to be affable. You want to build rapport. You may be in a bad mood otherwise that day, but you can't let that affect your session. All that aside, the most important thing, though, is how you phrase your questions. And this is the thing I've seen transgressed upon the most, of asking leading questions of, hey, does that bar look good at the top? Yes. All right, great. Let's move on. Never let someone get away with a one-word answer, not asking why, not probing. That's the other thing, is not probing at the right point. The best moderators will know a juicy moment when it happens and start asking why multiple times to get at root causes. The people who don't excel at that, or the people who need a little bit more training, let those moments go by. And going back to the consulting thing, clients pick up on that because they have the domain expertise. And they'll jump all over a moderator who doesn't probe. It's like, why didn't you probe? And if it happens in the first session, great. We can change as we go forward. But it's really and asking the right questions, not asking those leading questions as well.
So you talk about the difference between sometimes a facilitator and clients when it comes to domain expertise. How do you approach planning and executing a test when it's not a some area that you're familiar with, that you have expertise in, and what's the trigger you look for that tells you, oh, this is something juicy, this is something I need to dive into, when again might not be something that you're terribly familiar with.
Ideally, you've done your homework. For research projects, I love doing stakeholder interviews to start things off, of just understanding from the different stakeholders, ideally one-on-one, so they're not influenced by others sitting in the room. What are your goals? And have them tell the story of their goals. I want to hear that story, because I will hear the trigger words, right? I'll start learning to talk the talk and know what those words are that come up in all of those stakeholder conversations, to focus where I have to look in the conversations. A great example was I did some research last year for the railroad. And they have their own, when we got there, they gave us a book. Here's the book of railroad lingo. And so it was really important to learn to talk the talk, and also to talking the talk with participants lets them know that you understand and keeps them talking, right? If they think they have to explain things to you, then they don't want to do that. But if they explain basic things to you, they don't want to do that. But if you say, okay, no, I understand what X is, they're like, okay, great. And now here's what I believe about X. So it's really, getting that from your stakeholders and doing that homework up front, so you know what to listen for during those.
It's funny. It reminds me when I was building the practice, the Broad Institute, we were talking to bioinformaticians and people doing genetic research, and I do not have a science background, and I didn't understand half the words people were using. And even when I did, the way they put them together made no sense to me. But I found that I could listen for that tone of uncertainty or that tone of frustration, and then put together the nouns and verbs that they were just using, and use that to form a follow-up question. And then I could go back to like the product people afterwards, like, can you help me decode this? I think I was able to ask a good question, but I'm not exactly sure what the answer means.
That's a great point. You can probe without fully understanding the domain by using the participant's own words, just exactly as. It's really interesting to hear you describe it that way with the noun. I mean, that's exactly it. That's the acting. Well, it's more improv, I guess, of being able to do that on the fly, and to do that. And that's the other thing about moderation. I guess this is the third thing about moderation that makes a great moderator, is not only being able to ask the question in a non-leading way, listening to the participant say what they're saying, processing that, coming up with a follow-up question at the same time, but also having the notes come out your fingers, right? I'm a big believer of taking your own notes in situ. And because if you can wrangle that, it makes your analysis so much easier, because it gets into your brain. Some people take notes after the fact, and that's cool. But if it becomes the most fun in my mind when you are, again, thinking on the fly, really listening to the participant, but also making sure that you're documenting.
Your brain can handle more threads than mine can. I'll jot down notes of some follow-up questions I might want to ask so I don't forget them, but I have not been good at taking notes while I facilitate. So I either bring in a note taker or I'll do them afterwards. So
yep.
I'm very impressive. Kudos to you.
Touch typing. It's people hate to hear it, but if you learn to touch type and be able to maintain eye contact while doing all right and not misspelling things, that really goes a long way to help. Also, I play piano.
You got fast fingers. Your fingers are faster than mine. I just found sometimes my brain was split in these two directions of one part trying to think about, am I capturing this right? And the other part trying to think of the next follow-up question. And my brain couldn't handle that. Yeah. So that's amazing. I want to see you do research, because I want to see this in action. Is there any other? You mentioned like the homework and the prep and talking to stakeholders. Is there anything else that you do to set the stage that helps your research be more effective?
Set expectations. Stakeholders, I hate to say it, but treat stakeholders like users. You need to set expectations. Good user experience and good user interfaces are about setting expectations and meeting them, right? Same thing for research. All right, we're going to plan for this to be 6 weeks because recruiting always takes 2 weeks because recruiting is the worst part of the job. And being candid, right? There's a lot of logistics involved with research. We got to keep a lot of plates spinning as we're doing this.
That wraps up part 1 of my conversation with Dan Berlin. Tune in next week as we dive into improving as a facilitator, putting together the book 97 Things Every UX Practitioner Should Know, what he looks for in conference speaker proposals, being an effective presenter, and much more. You can find the show notes as well as past episodes at sucks.live. That's SUX for savingux.live. Be sure to subscribe to the podcast so you don't miss future episodes like the rest of this chat. You can also follow me on Twitter at Sonarc, SONARC, or on LinkedIn where I post show updates. Until next time, I'm Jeremy Kriegel, and this has been Saving UX.